We start.
Bismillah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وضل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباغي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العسام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك على نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت طاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رقبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وقلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقضائه ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فاده من البلاء أقلته وكم من عثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أقلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد عملي وخدعتني الدنيا بقرورها ونفسي بجنايتها. ومثالي يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي، ولا تفزحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك، أسأله كشف ضري والنذر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي، ولم أهترس فيه من تزيين عدوي، فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء، فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك، وخالفت بعض أوامرك، فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك، ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك، وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك، وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي، معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستغيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا مؤترفا. لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من شد وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني، يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني، يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتقضيتي، أبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي. يا إلهي وسيدي وربي، أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك، وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك، ولهج به لساني من ذكرك، واعتقده ضميري من حبك، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيت، أو تبعد من أدنيت، أو تشرد من آويت، أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمت. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي، أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا، وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادها، وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا، وعلى ضمائر هبت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة، وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعة، وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة. ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك. يا كريم يا رب، يا كريم يا رب، يا كريم يا رب، وأنت تعلم زعفي أن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثوه يسير بقاء قصير مدته. فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك. وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي، فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أضج وأبكي، لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته، فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك، وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النذر إلى كرامتك، أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك. فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأوجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين، ولا أصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولا أبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين. أفترى عنك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وهبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك، أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك، أم كيف يهرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه، أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم زعفه، أم كيف يتغلغل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه، أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه، أم كيف يرجو فضلك في إتقه منها فتتركه فيها. هيهات هيهات، ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما عملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك، فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاهديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما، أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي هتمتها وهكمتها وقلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبت وكل قبيح أسررت وكل جهل عملت كتمته أو أعلنت أخفيته أو أظهرت وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جواره، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترت، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلت أو إحسان فضلت أو بر نشرت أو رزق بسطت أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره. يا رب 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 يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بثغري وفاقتي، يا رب 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 يا رب. أسألك بحقك وقدسك وعزم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة آمين، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أهوالي، يا رب 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 يا رب. حض على خدمتك جواره واشدد على العظيمة جواره، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع عليك في البارزين وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة المؤمنين واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فارث ومن كادني فكيد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأغربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك. وجد لي بجودك واعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأقلني عثرتي واغفر زلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا ربي نسبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي. فاكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي، يا سريع الرضا، يا سريع الرضا، يا سريع الرضا. اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء، يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غناء. ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء. يا سابق النعم، يا دافع النقام، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بما أنت أهله. وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل وأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات. رحم الله من يقرأ الفاتحة مع الصلوات. Inshallah, please, brother and sister, keep all the Mary's High Islam, inshallah, in your prayers. Inshallah, recite 14 times Amma Yajib for all brothers and sisters who are suffering from COVID and or any other illnesses, inshallah. And also for the Faraj of Agha Imam al-Zaman, Ajjalallah Ta'ala Faraj al-Sharif, inshallah. Together, Dua Faraj, which is the most important dua in these days, together, inshallah, we recite that. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma kunna lawaliyika al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan, salawatuka alayhi wa ala aba'ih, fi hadhihi as-sa'a wa fi kulli as-sa'a, waliyan wa hafidha, wa qa'idan wa nasira, ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
اللهم صل على محمد Brother Saeed, may Allah accept your recitation.
Thank you. جزاك
الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Good to see you.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. التماس دعاء إن شاء الله.
دلوان تانك شده. خدافظ.
خدا نگهدار حضرت. يا الله.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الخطبة الثلاثون, خطبة number 30 of Nahjul Balagha. لو أمرت به لكنت قاتلا أو نهيت عنه لكنت ناصرا. This khutbah, you can say, is the first khutbah that is dedicated to the third Khalifa and the fitna that surrounded him and his assassination. Before this, we didn't have a khutbah where Amir al-Mu'mineen is only speaking of the third Khalifa and what happened. Although this is a short khutbah, there are some important points in it that I think I'm going to be covering in our next session. What I want to do in this session is to contextualize things a little bit. Yes, give context so that we can understand why Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying what he's saying in this khutbah. The khutbah itself is short, and I'll get into some of the details of what some have said about it, maybe being part of another khutbah or not. That's for our next session though. For now, in here, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he speaks about how different things can or cannot be said regarding the assassination of the third Khalifa. And one might wonder, why is Amir al-Mu'mineen walking on eggshells here? It's as if he is making a point to the people who are listening, but at the same time, he's very careful with his words. And so that is something that we can understand only if we know the context, the significance of this matter, of this incident of the assassination of Uthman, of the final years or the second half of the rule of Uthman. As some of you may know, Uthman ibn Affan, the third Khalifa, he was Khalifa for around 12 years. And so there are different things that are said about him and his rule, and different opinions, both within the Sunni school of thought and between the Sunni and Shi'i school of thought. So there will be different opinions in the Sunni school of thought itself, and of course there will always be there will always be differences of opinion between the Shi'i and Sunni schools of thought regarding the Khulafa, and how they did what they did and what they did all in all. So for that, I'm going to be, inshallah, covering some of the history regarding the time of Uthman ibn Affan, the second half of his rule, things that happened that pushed matters and circumstances to the edge, which eventually it all culminated in his assassination. What happened? What were some of the mistakes, mismanagements, and so on? A person with an objective look and perspective at what happened back then will come to the conclusion that, okay, so we can kind of understand why things happened, why things went downhill during the second half of Uthman's time, why things ended up in his assassination, why Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam has to be a little careful here, how he talks about it, and so on and so forth. So some of the mistakes we want to talk about that took place, whether you believe in Uthman being the third Khalifa, the third righteously guided Khalifa, the third of the Al-Khulafa Ar-Rashidun, or if you believe him to be not to hold such an authority, and you believe Amir al-Mu'mineen to be the true Khalifa of his time, doesn't matter here. We want to look at how things happened in the second half during the second half of the rule of Uthman, that even you will have prominent individuals from the Sunni school of thought. You will find that they will say, yeah, I mean, we respect him as the third highest person after the Holy Prophet because he was the third Khalifa. But then they will say that, okay, we don't believe he's infallible, so he made mistakes. Yeah, we will acknowledge that. There are some who will say that. So what are these things that some of these scholars of Ahlus Sunnah and the Shia are pointing out in regards to the second half of his rule? There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot that history books have mentioned. Before I get into the details, some of the details that we'll cover, so that we can better appreciate khutbah number 30, yes, I have to say this, brothers and sisters, that almost everything we're going to talk about in this session, some will have an answer to. We have to understand this, okay? And this is something that I'm always highlighting. The Shi'i school of thought will have certain things that it will be called out on, and we will have our answers. And the ones who come from Maktabul Khulafa, the school of thought that adheres to the Khulafa, will also be called out on certain things, and they will have answers. So I don't want anyone to think that whatever we say in this session, there's no answer to it. No, there will be answers to it. Every person will have an answer and a way to defend their faith and their school of thought at the end of the day, brothers and sisters. We have to understand that. That's just how it is. But yeah, we will look at it from our lens, our perspective. And of course, much of what we say will be coming from books that are not from Shi'i authors. But at the end of the day, we have to understand, even though they're not Shia, it doesn't mean everything we say is widely accepted at the same time either. These are things that we have to be cognizant of at the end of the day. All right, so having said all of that, some of the things that, brothers and sisters, will usually be acknowledged. people will accept from both schools of thought, no matter who they believe in, is the fact that some of the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were trampled during the time of Uthman that were not trampled before him. And this owes to the fact that it seems that it slowly reached a point for Uthman that what mattered to him to put in, when it came to putting people in charge, was the fact that they are Bani Umayyah. Let's not forget, Uthman is of the Bani Umayyah himself. Now the Bani Umayyah themselves, within them, they will have different, groups and different clans from, within the tribe of Banu Umayyah. Yeah. So you'll have the Banu Sufyan, for example, the children of Abu Sufyan, namely Muawiyah, Yazid bin Muawiyah, Muawiyah the second son of Yazid, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So you'll have them, and then you'll have the clan that Uthman comes from. But at the end of the day, Muawiyah, for example, and Uthman will be distant cousins because they all go back to Banu Umayyah. They're all from Banu Umayyah. So with Uthman taking power, yes, Banu Umayyah was in power, yes. And so slowly the relatives of Uthman, who were Banu Umayyah, as many of you have probably heard, they started taking over in different parts of the Muslim world, assuming positions and governance over the people, the Muslim lands. Now the thing is, when you look at it, what you feel is that, okay, that's what all that mattered. That's all that mattered in the eyes of the likes of Uthman when it came to putting people in different positions. And we'll get to some examples to illustrate that, like top-notch Sahabis of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam were set aside for young cousins of Uthman. Yeah, they were set aside from their positions as governors so that younger cousins of Uthman could take over. People who were not Banu Umayyah. It didn't matter if they were grand Sahabi or not. They were put aside in favor of younger Banu Umayyah cousins of Uthman. All right. So and that is the criterion for you. What happens is the people that you choose might not be the best when it comes to qualifications, Islamic qualifications, and Islamic qualities and characteristics that you've instilled within yourself. So an example of that you've all heard probably was the person by the name of Al-Walid bin Uqbah. Walid bin Uqbah is the one that the Quran says whenever a fasiq comes to you, fasiq meaning a person who does open sin or commits those grave sins. When he comes to you with news about something, verify that news. Don't just act upon what he's telling you. And there's a whole story behind this about how Walid came back to the Holy Prophet ﷺ and spoke of a people in a way that the Prophet thought that he has to go fight those people. And the Quran says, no, slow down. If you don't verify all the news that comes to you, even if it's coming from a person that's problematic, then you're going to accidentally take the lives of people who are innocent. Here, right, we have Walid bin Uqbah, who is this verse is talking about, and the whole story revolves around him. The Quran scolding him, and indirectly at least. And then all of a sudden he's made a governor. Okay, yeah, we understand that people can do tawbah and can become better people if they've made a mistake in the past. But you have to be cautious when it comes to these significant positions. You can't just say, okay, inshallah, this person is better just because they're your cousin. And so he's the same one who now is in charge, has power. The very, very famous story of him praying more than 2 rak'ah of Salat al-Fajr. Yeah, 4 rak'ah of Salat al-Fajr. Why? Because he was intoxicated. And so this was really a shame. This was really an embarrassment. And to add insult to injury, the fact that they weren't going to punish him for what he had done. They were not going to punish him. And people were complaining to the third Khalifa about him. But he didn't. And eventually he was forced to let Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, according to some other reports, carry out the hadd, or that punishment for drinking. Yeah. So this is a person that's leading Salah and is governing the Muslims. Very sad. So the laws of Allah are being trampled. Now this person, who did he replace as governor? Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, that one of the grandest Sahabis of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, of course, in the Shi'i school of thought, we will have questions about Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas. Why? Because we'll say, like, for example, why didn't he give bay'ah to Ali ibn Abi Talib when he became Khalifa? These are questions that we have. But all in all, there's no denying that Sa'ad was one of the top Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the point that he's one of the 10 that were granted Jannah in the famous hadith of Ahlus Sunnah. So if he's this great, you're not going to send someone by the name of Walid bin Uqba, yeah, to replace him. Yeah, and there's a line here that I have that has been recorded in history, that when this Walid came to Sa'ad and wanted to replace him, what did he say in Kufa? He said to him, he says to Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, he said, Wallah ma adri akista ba'dana am hamiqna ba'dak. Which means, like, I don't know. He's telling this to that grand Sahabi. He's telling him, I don't know. Are you like being smart after us? Or are we just being dumb after you? Which kind of implies, at least to my understanding, that, this is like, I don't know what's going on. Like, why am I supposed to replace you? That's my understanding of this line there. I spent some time thinking about it. Couldn't quite crack the code here of exactly what he means. But that's what it's saying word for word. It's saying that, by Allah, I don't know. Are you being smart after us? Or are we just being dumb after you? Yeah, after you, I guess, are leaving this position. Anyway, Sa'ad replies to him and responds by saying that don't be too upset, don't be too worried. You're saying that, this was a dumb move. Don't worry about it. Why? Because فَإِنَّمَا هُوَ الْمُلْكِ يَتَغَدَّاهُ قَوْمٌ وَيَتَعَشَّاهُ آخَرُونَ. This is mulk and rulership. This is how rulership works. This is how rulership is. How in the morning one person will have it, or one people will have it, and then by the time night comes, another group is going to have it. What I understand from this is he's implying that, look, there are no rules here, and it just comes and goes. So, like, okay, you're saying that you don't understand why this is even happening. I'm letting you know this is how rulership works. It doesn't run on proper rules. It's not based on these things. It's actually based on just randomness and some people's agenda and some people what they like. That's it. And so he replaced Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas. And then Sa'ad says something in the end which really is important. He says, أراكم ستجعلونها ملكا. I see you all. What I see and what I forecast is that what you all are going to do, you all meaning Banu Umayyah, of course, here, ستجعلونها mulkan. You're going to turn this into an anarchy, a monarchy. You're going to turn this into a monarchy. I know it. You're going to turn it into what kings do, mulkan. You're going to turn it into that. Before this, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was ruling over us because of religion, not because of monarchy. After him, according to them, the first Khalifa, the second Khalifa, they weren't related in their clans. Of course, they were all Quraysh, but one of them was Bani Taym, yeah. One is Banu Hashim of Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam, and so on. But like each of them kind of comes to power because of religion and the people choosing, and I guess maybe the ijma' of those who are grand Sahabis before, Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam, and so on. So like that's how they came to power. But it's going to turn into mulk where each person is going to appoint the one after him. And that's what it started with Muawiyah and went down all the way to Yazid and Muawiyah bin Yazid and so on. Anyway, so Sa'ad, he's right here, yeah, in foreseeing this. So that's Walid bin Uqba. So this is this is an example for that first problem that you have, and this was not the only example of people who just aren't qualified who come and are ruling and are governing, but they are trampling God's laws. This guy, he's drinking before Fajr. Yeah. How does something like this happen? All right, so that's it. And some people have said, according to some of our history books and some of our historians, that how other companions pointed out how Uthman didn't act according to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so they have some mean things to say there. This is something that Rasul Ja'fariyan says in his book. So that's the first one. The second one, putting unqualified individuals in different positions of power because they were related to him. So like sometimes you put someone that is trampling God's laws. Sometimes it's not that they're necessarily trampling God's laws, but your only criterion is he's my cousin, he's my relative, he's my brother, and so on. So for example, we already had the same case that we talked about. Walid bin Uqba, is replacing Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas. Another example, he removes Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, a very, very prominent and famous companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Once again, the Shi'i school of thought will have some questions in regards to Abu Musa. Once again, he's one of the ones who never gave bay'ah to Ali ibn Abi Talib when Ali alayhi salam became Khalifa. The question is, why? Is he not the fourth Khalifa? And doesn't bay'ah have to be given to a Khalifa of the time? If bay'ah has to be given to the first three khulafa, then it should also be given to the fourth one. This is a part of history we just don't understand, like what's going on here. But anyway, aside from that, and some of these types of questions and other questions surrounding some of these individuals, all in all, there's no denying, once again, that these are grand Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. What happens? He's the governor of Basra, and we'll talk about that maybe later as well, a little bit more. So he's removed. A person by the name of Abdullah bin Amir, the cousin of Uthman, is placed instead of him. How old is he? 25 years old, brothers and sisters. 25 years old. Some even say less than that. So you can tell that, okay, well, is he a horrible person? Whatever. It doesn't matter. He's your cousin. That's why you're putting him there. Instead of who? Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. We have to understand, and let me remind the brothers and sisters as well, that the same way the Shia go to the Ahlul Bayt, the Imams, for attaining guidance, attaining the religion, learning about religion, learning the rules and laws of religion, almost the same way, I don't want to say the same way, but very similarly, you will have the Sunni fiqh being like that, where usually a hadith will go back to either the Prophet, of course, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but you'll find also that sometimes it'll end with one of the Sahaba saying something. And so the question that we will have is, okay, well, who gave them that authority for us to get religion from them? The answer will be, well, these are the ones who accompanied the Prophet. And it makes sense to an extent, We're saying that, if we have infallible imams, we'll ask them. So it won't be anyone else's turn to ask anymore. But if assuming, brothers and sisters, let's put ourselves in others' shoes, assuming that there are no infallibles after the Holy Prophet ﷺ, then it makes sense that you're going to ask the closest companions of the Holy Prophet. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Amr bin al-As, for example. This is another example. He got removed. He was the governor of Egypt. The governor of Egypt. Uthman places someone by the name of Abdullah bin Sa'ad bin Abi Sarh. Puts him instead. And who is this person? This person is the brother of Uthman through rada'ah. Rada'ah means nursing. So either Uthman's mom nursed this Abdullah bin Sa'ad, or Abdullah bin Sa'ad's mother had nursed Uthman in their childhood. And so they become brothers through rada'ah. Rada'ah is a fiqhi term referring to nursing. Okay, so this is brother now. And there are special rules for that. In the Shi'i and Sunni school of thought, we have rules for this. That you become mahram to the one who nursed you. You become mahram to the daughters of that person if you're a man, or to the sons of that person if you're a woman, yeah, and so on and so forth. The only difference is that you do not take inheritance. But other than that, all the mahram, non-mahram rules, all of the marriage being haram or not, or permissible or not with that person, all those rules will apply that apply to a biological brother or sister or son and daughter. Okay, so anyway, we don't want to get into that. So he's like it's his brother through Radah. He puts him there in Egypt instead of who? Amr bin al-As, one of those Sahabis once again of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Although he is one of the later Sahabis, but at the end of the day, he is very highly revered, not in the Shi'i school at all, but in the Sunni school of thought. So you're going to replace this grand Sahabi once again. I'm hesitant to say grand, but he is pretty big. Because he embraced Islam, they say, before the conquest of Mecca. So it wasn't by force. Him and Khalid bin Walid, they embraced Islam together a few maybe years before the conquest of Mecca. If I'm not mistaken, in the 6th year after Hijrah. So that's pretty impressive for some. And so he will be revered. And so Amr bin al-As is the governor of Egypt. He's removed for who? For someone like this. And they say he got in so much trouble, the person who replaced him, Abdullah bin Sa'd bin Abi Sarh, this Rada'i brother of Uthman, he got in so much trouble that they say one of the reasons why the people of Egypt later on revolted against Uthman is because of the person that he replaced Amr bin al-As with. Yeah, so it seems that this is it. This is all that matters in the eyes of the third Khalifa, especially in the second half of his rule. To the point that we have a saying by him. Once again, I'm going to repeat what I said in the beginning, that all of what I'm saying, people will have answers to probably. They will have something to counter with. But these have been recorded somewhere in history. For example, in Musnad Ahmad bin Hanbal, which is a famous book, of course, it says that Uthman told Ammar bin Yasir that if I had the keys to Jannah, I would have given those keys to Banu Umayyah so that all of them can enter Jannah. So it seems that he feels that if you are Banu Umayyah, then you probably deserve to go to Jannah. That's how good a job you do probably in governing. That's how good a job you do in representing Islam, and so on and so forth. So what are we doing again, brothers and sisters? We're going through the different reasons why there was a buildup. And why Amir al-Mu'mineen in this khutbah number 30 that we'll discuss next session it seems that he's careful, but at the same time he wants to make sure he gets a message across to the people as well. We'll get to that, inshallah. So that's number 2 on the list. Number 3 on the list. So number 1 was people trampling the rules of God. Number 2, only putting relatives in power. Number 3 is expelling like different grand companions of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or others who were prominent figures, even if they might not have been considered companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For example, Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. It's very famous that he was expelled to a place called Rabada outside of Mecca, of Medina, and he died there, a barren land with nothing going on. So what's the story with all of that? I don't know if I should get into it or not. In the interest of time, I won't. There are different versions of this story. In Sahih Bukhari, you'll have a rosier picture of what happened, but history records that other things happened, and so it depends on which school of thought you adhere to, whether you're going to take the account of Bukhari over other accounts and so on. But I'll tell you that there is a difference here. Some will say, based on the narration in Bukhari, that everything was awesome between Uthman and Abu Dhar. Uthman expels him for a reason, expels him, and so he was in Sham. Excuse me, let me take that back. He was in Sham with Muawiyah, and he had a problem with Muawiyah over a verse of the Quran. And so Muawiyah sent him somewhere else. And so when he went there, eventually he ends up in Medina. this Abu Dhar. He ends up in Medina. When he ends up in Medina, there's some trouble that comes up there too. And so he's the one, this is the part that I want to highlight. Before this, the details weren't very important. Was he in Medina first, then he went to Sham, then somewhere else, and then back to Medina? Or right now my memory just for a second went blank. This is the part that I need right now. And that is when he eventually comes back to Medina from Sham. There's things that happen. He's the one who tells Uthman, this is according to Bukhari, he's the one who tells Uthman, oh Uthman, I feel like, it's better if I don't stay here because there will be some issues. Let me go somewhere else. And Uthman says, okay, go. And so Abu Dhar is the one who kind of expels himself from Medina, so to speak, to a place that's not very far away from Medina, but it's not in Medina either, and it's a barren land in which he dies. That is the Bukhari version of the story. But the other version of the story is that no, he had issues with Muawiyah, had issues with Uthman, and he was sent out of these places and expelled from them, and was kind of exiled from these places. Now, there is a khutbah in Nahjul Balagha, we'll get to it, inshallah, one day, where Amir al-Mu'mineen is speaking to Abu Dhar. So we'll get to that, inshallah, one day, and what Amir al-Mu'mineen says to him as he's bidding him farewell, although some say that Uthman had said that no one's allowed to accompany Abu Dhar as he's leaving Medina. But what I want to say right now is that Abu Dhar was giving these guys a hard time, and that's why they kept expelling him and sending him into exile eventually. Another example of people, prominent figures, Ammar bin Yasir has a long story there. Once again, there will be huge differences of opinion. I have to say this. I want you to remember this. Uthman's time, brothers and sisters, is one of those times that there's a lot of difference of opinion amongst Shi'i and Sunni historians and scholars. We have to understand that. It's one of those very, very sensitive times in the history of Islam. Yeah. And so, I mean, once we go through Uthman's story, we'll understand why it's so significant and why it will be under so much scrutiny by different historians, and everyone's going to have their version, because whatever version you take when it comes to this part of history is what you're going to build the rest of the history that happens afterwards and how you look at things afterwards, right? It's going to be all based on that. If you look at Uthman's time and the assassination of Uthman in one way, you will have a certain interpretation of the Battle of Jamal and Siffin, maybe. If you look at it in another way, then you'll have another interpretation. All the way forward for history, how you look at it sometimes will be dependent on how you understand previous incidents of history. All right, so people like Ammar bin Yasir, there's some very, very crazy stories. Now, once again, I am sure there will be scholars who will say, no, we do not accept these at all. But there will be other scholars that will shake their heads and they will say, yeah, unfortunately, this did happen. And we are convinced. And not all the time Shia even. Yeah. But I'm not going to say the majority of Sunni scholars also accept what happened to Ammar bin Yasir during the time of Uthman. All right. And others like Malik bin al-Ashtar. Malik al-Ashtar, he's not a Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he's a prominent figure in his time. He got in trouble too, and so on and so forth. So that's number 3. Important people getting in trouble, having trouble, either being expelled and sent away, or sometimes hurt physically in this time as well. And this, makes people upset. Number 4 on the list is the unlawful distribution of the wealth during his time, of the public treasury. Here, this is one of those main ones, brothers and sisters, because look, if there's corruption, let it be. But if there's going to be economic problems, while there is money, but it's just not reaching the people it's supposed to reach, then we got an issue here. People are going to be upset. When people are hungry, they will resort to irrational means sometimes and harsh ways of doing things. And they are not to be blamed necessarily either. Although sometimes, they will overdo things as well, as we will, inshallah, once we go into the khutbah of Imam Ali alayhi salam, khutbah number 30, you'll see that he does kind of scold the ones who took a harsh route as well. So as I said, we'll do that in our next session. But for now, number 4 on our list is the distribution of the wealth, the way it was distributed. So for example, you'll have a historian who will say, look, I'm not going to mention everything in regards to how much money was given out, because most people who read it won't be able to bear it. They'll get angry. And so we're supposed to protect the image of certain figures of Islam, so we're not going to do that. Makes sense. I mean, this is how I see it, brothers and sisters. This is how I see it. Someone might say, oh, you're a historian, you should share everything. The answer they'll give you is, yeah, I'm a historian, but I'm a Muslim historian. And I believe that the image of our figures has to be maintained. Yeah. And so if there's something out there that I feel the people aren't going to understand, right? Or won't know the actual justification for that action, and it's going to hurt the image of, for example, the Khulafa, then I'm not going to mention it. Makes sense, kind of. Although it goes against the kind of unwritten oath that a historian takes before writing history, because the rule is, if you're a historian, to write down everything that you believe in, and so or is proven to you at least, or whatever agenda your book has. If your book, the history book that you're writing, is saying, okay, I'm just going to compile everything, weak or strong narrations, then that's what you have to do. If you're going to say, I'm going to only bring strong ones, then only bring the strong ones. But you can't leave some strong accounts out just because it's going to taint the image of others. Yeah, that's what usually will be said in response. But all in all, it's understandable. They want to maintain that image, and so they won't mention certain things that they feel the people won't be able to digest. It's understandable to an extent. I'm not going to justify it, but we can understand where they're coming from. I'll just give you one example here. Harith bin al-Hakim, Hakam, Harith bin al-Hakam, the brother of Marwan bin Hakam, which we all know about. This Harith gives him Uthman, and by the way, Uthman's son-in-law was Marwan bin Hakam. So his son-in-law's brother gives him 300,000 dirhams, gives him a piece of land in which a marketplace of Medina was in, that the Prophet had given as sadaqah to the Muslims. Okay, he grants it to this person by Harith bin al-Hakam, by the name of Harith bin al-Hakam. So there's a lot of financial corruption here as well, to the point that a person like Allama Amini, he says, لَقَدْ اصْطَنَعَ الْخَلِيفَةُ لِهَذَا الرَّجُلِ ثَلَاثًا لَا أَظُنُّهُ يَخْرُجُ مِنْ عُهْدَةِ النَّقْدِ عَلَيْهَا. He did three things with this Harith bin al-Hakam, that I mentioned two of them, that you just can't stop criticizing. You can't find a way out to justify them. Yeah. So anyway, it was all of these things that come together, right? And more, of course, especially in the second half, during the second half of the rule of Uthman. What happens? That the people are fed up. What happens now? Let's move on to the assassination. According to our historians now, I'm not going to go to the Sunni side of things. Let's talk a little bit about this. As time passes, things get worse and worse. When you're the Khalifa, you're going to be the one leading Salat in the masjid. Yeah, you're going to be addressing the mu'mineen from the minbar, right? It says that people will get up in the masjid and speak out against the Khalifa in his face. Okay, this kind of is not good, because it breaks the image and the respect of that figure. At the end of the day, he's the Khalifa of the Muslimin and the one who has replaced Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So at the end of the day, when you do this, you are indirectly somewhat hurting the position of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Very, very indirectly, of course. But this is Khalifa to Rasulullah. We're not talking about Yazid or Muawiyah here. We're talking about the third Khalifa that they will consider of the Khulafa al-Rashidun, as I said before. So this isn't good. Where in history do you find that Amir al-Mu'mineen gets up in front of everyone in the masjid and starts calling out the Khalifa in his face in front of everybody? Like, you get the feeling, now I haven't done an exhaustive research into this, but you see here and there how Amir al-Mu'mineen, even if he was critical of things, he would make that criticism in a way that it wouldn't put any dent into that position of being Khalifa to Rasulullah. Because at the end of the day, Amir al-Mu'mineen himself is probably going to be taking that position in the future anyway. And so if you've compromised it already and put holes in it, then that's not good. So it reached the point where people are doing this. And so what is Uthman going to do? He's going to use force to suppress it and calm people down. When you use force and have no other choice but to resort to force, that is the beginning of the end. Yeah. It says that he would enter the masjid, people would call him an na'thal, which is a derogatory term. It says that some of the Sahaba that were part of Bay'atul Shajara, yeah, and who had that honor of giving the bay'ah to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam under that tree that the Quran talks about, they were calling him out. You see, it's a big difference between the people calling you out and then some of the grand Sahaba calling you out. So now slowly what happens is, as I said, because he had put governors in different places that were just, the only qualification they had was that they were his relatives, slowly people from different parts of the Muslim lands came to Medina to complain. It says a group from Egypt came to Medina to complain about the rulers there. Yeah. What does Uthman do? Uthman sends Ammar bin Yasir. But Ammar is critical of the Khalifa himself. And so they say Ammar, when he's there in Egypt, he also starts causing trouble for the Khalifa. And so things aren't getting better. And so Ammar is removed. And once you remove Ammar, then the people who were on his side are going to get upset. So it says 400 to 700 people came from Egypt to Medina to show their objection. Okay, so that's Egypt. Kufa. In Kufa, we also have how, we talked about how stuff was happening there because of Walid bin Uqba. And then the people stand up during the time of another one who is governing by the name of Sa'id bin al-As, who is also Banu Umayyah. People are upset. And so he expels them from Kufa to Sham. People like Malik al-Ashtar. And so they're in Sham. And so then Muawiyah expels them from Sham to somewhere else, because they're not going to get along with Muawiyah either. But then eventually the people in Kufa rise against Sa'id bin al-As and kick him out, this Banu Umayyah ruler. And so once he's out, Malik al-Ashtar comes back in. And so they kind of, get up and go to Medina, and they're angry because of, although they've sent letters to Uthman before, nothing changed. So now they're going to go there. So this shows that they didn't just attack right away. They were trying their best to make changes. They're sending letters, but it's just not working. And so people can only, be so patient, and they're fed up and they go. Basra, same thing. Basra, people are complaining after Abu Musa is removed, and that Abdullah bin Amr bin Kariz is replacing him, Uthman's cousin. Or maybe it was his, either it was his brother or his cousin. I don't know. The name I have here is different than the other name. Anyway, one of his cousins or his brother from Rada'a, whichever one it was. Once again, either it's Banu Umayyah or somewhat related to Uthman. And so people in Basra are upset. So Basra, Kufa, Egypt, other places as well. So they come, and look, here Amir al-Mu'mineen, he plays a very pivotal role. Of course, history has recorded this as well. And he kind of reconciles. He's the in-between person, although he's critical himself. This is the important part, brothers and sisters. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is critical himself, but he still reconciles. He still makes sure that everything goes back to normal. And so these people go back to their respective lands and regions. There's a problem though. On the way back to Egypt, they catch one of Uthman's servants who is rushing to Egypt, and they find a letter on him sealed with Uthman's seal, right? Telling the governor of Egypt, right? The governor of Egypt, yeah. So this one is his brother from Rada'a. Here I've written, yeah. Abdullah bin Sa'ad, his brother from Rada'a, telling him to kill some of these individuals and imprison others of them. These same ones who had come to Medina complaining, yeah, to kill them, and some of them imprison them. The letter is saying that. So these guys are going back to Egypt peacefully because they've come to an agreement. Uthman has said he'll change things and so on. But then all of a sudden they find this letter. Okay, this is going to finish everything off. And there's a lot of details here that I'm going to skip, okay? All I will say is this, that historians, especially analytical ones and critical ones, they will say that, listen, when they go back to Uthman with this letter and they say, what gives, what's going on, how dare you? Uthman says, I didn't even know such a letter was written to Egypt, the governor of Egypt, Abdullah bin Sa'd bin Abi Sarh. Yeah, I didn't even know. So now either he didn't know really or he did know. But the question is, if he didn't know, then why was a letter going out? How did it go with his stamp and seal? That's the question, and that's where the involvement of Marwan bin al-Hakam becomes apparent. He was the scribe of Uthman. And so some historians have said that this was not the first time that Marwan had done such a thing. Marwan feels like, and that's why I said I'm skipping some details, but in those details, one of the things I'm skipping is, the whole story of how Marwan tries to convince Uthman not to give in to the demands of these people and so on. But that's a different story. There are different versions of the story here as well, just like everything else, unfortunately. Anyway, Uthman says, I didn't know. They're like, it doesn't matter. Like, your seal and stamp is here. Either you did it or someone else that's related to you, linked to you, did it. And here, this is where some historians say it was Marwan. And so here, the people now, they besiege the palace of Uthman, right? And they want a real change now. And so in the beginning, it's not like they wanted to assassinate him. But once again, here, unfortunately, according to history, Uthman as well, they say you have to step down. He's like, no, I'm not going to step down. And a hadith is mentioned here in this context that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that, Uthman says that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told me that God will put a shirt on you and the hypocrites will want you to remove it. The shirt of khilafah, in other words, that you're going to be made khalifa by Allah as if. Others that are hypocrites will want you to remove this from your, do not remove it, and stand firm until you join me in paradise. Now our scholars of course will say this is a fabricated hadith. Anyway, push comes to shove, things start just getting worse and worse and escalating. He says, I'm not going to step down. There are details here as well of why he didn't step down and so on. And in all of this, Amir al-Mu'minin Ali alayhi salam is trying his best to keep things calm. And he's speaking to Uthman. And we have this in Nahjul Balagha as well, where Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam tells him, don't be a riding camel or a ride or a vessel that Marwan is going to ride. In other words, Marwan is taking advantage of you, your son-in-law. He's taking advantage of you. Don't be the one that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, once this person gets killed, there will be bloodshed amongst the Muslims till Yawmul Qiyamah, which that is the case. This is true. It all goes back to that. If it wasn't for the assassination of Uthman, then the battles after Uthman's death would not be justified the way they are. Till today, some people justify those battles. And Imam Ali becoming fourth Khalifa would have made a lot of changes that he wanted to, instead of having to spend all of his time fighting in those battles. I'm going to end with this part as well. So you'll say to yourself, okay, well, where is Muawiyah in all of this? Muawiyah is supposed to, help out. He's the distant cousin of Uthman. And he has a lot of resources in Sham. Tariq al-Yaqubi says this. Okay, now once again, of course, people will have answers to this. They'll say that the report is not accurate, the report might not be reliable, and so on. But our historians and some Sunni historians will also accept such a report. That in Tariq al-Yaqubi it says that Muawiyah wrote to, Uthman wrote to Muawiyah, said, hurry up, come, help me, save me. Yes, I'm surrounded. And for 49 days, the palace of Uthman, they say, was surrounded. And so it says Muawiyah gathered 12,000 troops, brothers and sisters, 12,000. And he comes to the maybe outskirts of Sham with that army, but then he says, you all stay here. I'm going to Medina to visit Uthman, see what's going on there, and to see, if we need to go and actually fight. So he comes to Uthman, he's asking him about things, and Uthman, it's interesting, he says, قَدْ قَدِمْت لِأَعْرِفَ رَأْيَكَ. And Muawiyah says, I'm here to see what you think. What should I do? So that I go back to the army, bring the army so we can do something about this. قال, Uthman said, لا والله ولكنك أردت أن أقتل فتقول. No. The reason why you came here without an army is because in the end you want me to get killed. So that you can say, أنا ولي الثأر. That I am now going to ask for his blood. And I'm going to avenge his blood and ask for his blood money, so to speak. Yeah? And I want to retaliate for his death. I want to retaliate. I want to get those criminals and put them to justice. That's what you want to do. Irja, فَجِئْنِ بِالنَّاسِ. Go back and bring the people. What are you talking about? You came here all alone. So it says, فَرَجَعَ فَلَمْ يَعُدْ إِلَيْهِ حَتَّى قُتِلْ. Muawiyah went back, but never came until the third Khalifa was assassinated. So all of this is happening, brothers and sisters. And after this is how everything just spiraled out of control during the time of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Everyone can just fight Imam Ali because he is not willing to give up the killers of Uthman, because according to a lot of people, it was unknown who the killers of Uthman even were. But this served as a pretext for the Battle of Jamal and the Battle of Siffin, unfortunately. And all the bad things that happened afterwards, they all owe to, in one way, they all owe to the assassination of Uthman. This is something that I always say, and that is that even though we had a Saqifa, even though we had Umar ibn al-Khattab appointing a council to appoint the third Khalifa, and so on and so forth. True that the Khilafah didn't reach Amir al-Mu'mineen from the start. He could have fixed a lot of things as the fourth Khalifa even. But because of the assassination of Uthman, is why Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam could not fix things after Uthman. If Uthman had died a natural death and he was very old, then Amir al-Mu'mineen in his 60s, or maybe no, his late 50s actually, would have become Khalifa, and he would have had a good amount of time to be able to fix a lot of things and make sure moving forward things don't go off track. But unfortunately, what was not supposed to happen happened, and the assassination of Uthman took place, and after that everything goes out of control, unfortunately, to the point where, as we saw in previous khutbahs, Amir al-Mu'mineen has to rely on the Kufans to help him. The Kufans eventually stop helping him. Amir al-Mu'mineen becomes Shaheed, Nahrawan, all these things after Shahadat of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, Imam al-Hasan, and so on and so forth, till Muawiyah becomes Khalifatul Muslimin for 20 years. Yes. So this is the context, yes, that we needed to understand how big an event this was, so that we can understand why Amir al-Mu'mineen is going to word things the way he does in khutbah number 30, inshallah, that we will cover in our next session. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everybody who is joining us. Brother Khurshid, Sister Rabab, Sister Kaniz, and thank you for the kind words, Sister Rabab, as well. Inshallah, keep us all in your du'as. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.